Hello everybody, so here is Black Angel again, and I'm here with a video that I'm going to put in the category MBTI and Enneagram, in the two categories MBTI and Enneagram, and that is going to be about the things that I didn't mention in the previous video. So first of all, we're touching the topic of patterns, NI and TI. Now, why am I so confused about which function is actually responsible for these patterns? The way that I use to recognize patterns and functions, as I said, is to think about stuff that I read and reorganizing my thoughts according to what I see in the real world out there. So the information is tested over thousands of people, and my reading of the information comes from my experience of other thousands of people. So TI and NI related to, or NI and TI related to patterns. Okay, my issue is this. I know for a fact, because it's written in socionics everywhere and in Jungian cognitive functions too, that introverted intuition is the function responsible for seeing patterns. But it's never going too much into the specific of how this thing actually happens and what it's actually meant with introverted intuition thinking in patterns, because that's how it's put, that introverted intuition thinks in patterns. Then we know that introverted thinking is the function responsible for structure and categorizing. So since every time that I mention a pattern, what I'm actually seeing is a category or some sort of structure of some sort, what I'm wondering is if patterns are actually a TI thing or an NI thing, and in what way they're considering it an NI thing, and in what way they're considering it a TI thing. Now, there's also a subdued discussion here going on, which is a philosophical discussion within psychology environments. And it's actually a very high thing. I'm going to mention it just for those of you who are a little bit more intelligent. Anyway, there is a subdued discussion going on that is cause and effect. Is cause and effect part of logic or is it not? Well, the answer is no. Cause and effect is not a part of logic. So that's the point here, that if you think of cause and effect, we have pattern A that leads to pattern B, and pattern B that could potentially lead to pattern C or pattern D. Or you can have a chain or whatever the case may be. And this is cause and effect, which is the same way in which syllogism, which is pure logic and introverted thinking, works. That is, if you have case A, and case B is a smaller group of A, then if you have a member of B, then you have an A. I don't know if you know that thing. Like, for example, or all felines have 4 legs. Cats are felines, hence cats have 4 legs. That kind of thing. That's a syllogism. That's raw logic. That's TI. It's making categories. It works in categories and builds up categories. Whereas introverted intuition would be cause and effect. Would be that you have seen something moving there. It was small and fluffy, and it had a nice face. So it was either a rabbit or a cat. So the pattern is similar. And therefore, what a lot of people are discussing about in intellectual circles is if this thing is actually logic or not. And the answer social psychologists have come to is that it is not. So Cause and effect is not logic. As a matter of fact, with scientific experiments, it is possible to test any logic pattern, but it is not possible to test cause and effect. And this is something that I find extremely exhilarating. It makes me enthusiastic, and I find it extremely funny. Anyway, moving on. So this is the reason why I'm considering and pondering about patterns, because in some way patterns are categories, and that could be because I'm not detaching from my introverted thinking. So I personally think in NI and TI terms. So that's my chain of NI first, TI second. That's my normal way of thinking. And what I normally do to understand other types is to detach from my way of thinking, exclude myself from the equation, and automatically start thinking in a way that is not my normal way of thinking, so that I can understand 360 degrees what the other person is going through. This is what I do with my customers and my clients when they come to me. This is what I do when I try to understand types. This is what I do when I start analyzing a person that I cross outside, and so on. So what I need to do now is to identify specifically what TI is and what NI is, so that I can detach from both and start seeing them independently. So I need to start thinking like an INTJ, and then at some point I will start thinking, for example, like an INTP, and I will need to see what the difference between the two is. I would probably rather pick other types, because an INTP is not good for that thing. Maybe an ENTP would be better. And that's because an INTP subconsciously uses an I. Anyway, this is what concerns TI versus NI and what I'm currently analyzing. So don't think it's something superficial. It's something extremely deep and extremely in-depth that I really need to work on. Moving on, next topic. Next topic is Enneagram. So the reason why I mentioned Enneagram at the beginning of my previous video is that if you're looking for an Enneagram 5 and you want to see what an Enneagram 5 looks like, and it's an extremely stereotypical Enneagram 5, that's Ebenizer Scrooge. Ebenizer Scrooge is the Enneagram 5. Possibly Enneagram 5 Wing 6, SPSX. Or SPSO. He's extremely introverted and very wrapped up in himself. Anyway, this issue, this problem with perception is typical of Enneagram 5. There's another type that shares the same issue, which is Enneagram 6. Enneagram 6 has a problem with belief at the origin, at the root, and another type that has that issue in yet another version is Enneagram 7. But you find again that pattern in Enneagram 9. Well, any pattern of any problem of any other type you will find in Enneagram 9. Enneagram 9 is the crown of the Enneagram because it wraps up every problem, and they can actually relate with each and every Enneagram out there. Each and every Enneagram and each and every type, they are called the mediator for that reason, because they have this ability to actually see the problems of every type and leave them like they do. Enneagram 9 is a very, very peculiar and special type that I'm currently working on this type, and I consider it very fascinating. Anyway, Enneagram 5. Why is Ebenizer Scrooge an Enneagram 5? The problem with perception. So why do you not trust your perception? That's typical Enneagram 5. The problem the fear of Enneagram 5 is that they cannot trust their mind. They cannot trust the external world for sure. Therefore, they wrap up in themselves and they fear not being in a position to actually trust their minds. So this belief pattern that has to do with the need to gather information, gather data, and become more and more knowledgeable, because otherwise they cannot cope and they cannot be sure about whatever it is that they have as a problem. Then if you watch the movie that I was mentioning, which is Disney plus Robert Zemeckis' A Christmas Carol, you will see a lot of patterns in Ebenezer Scrooge. Like, for example, he lives with very little. He doesn't spend money. He lives on very little. He doesn't eat much. That's avarice. It's typical of Enneagram 5. Enneagram 5's the Enneagram 5's passion is avarice. So yeah, I think that's word in English. If it's not, I'm sorry. And I'm going to write it in the comment section, obviously. Anyway, yeah, that's another thing. What else could I mention? There's a lot of things actually that display an Enneagram 5 in Ebenezer Scrooge. And another thing, the complaint of Enneagram 5, the complaint of Enneagram 5 is I live in a world of idiots and I'm the only intelligent person in a world of idiots. So that's an Enneagram 5, and that's the rant of Ebenezer Scrooge. How can I be happy? Well, that's when his nephew talks to him and tells him, he tells his nephew, how can you be happy when you have nothing? And his nephew replies, what right do you have that you have everything not to be happy? And he says, how can I be happy when I'm living in a world of idiots? So that's basically the complaint of Enneagram 5. Enneagram 5 is basically the only intelligent person on planet Earth, whereas everybody else is an idiot. So yeah. And personally, there's a lot that I can see of myself in Ebenezer Scrooge, and I was going to make a fully different video actually at the beginning. But anyway, yeah, I don't think I'm an Enneagram 5, by the way. I've thought that for a lot of time, but I don't think I'm an Enneagram 5. I'm not sure yet. I'm working on my Enneagram, and I'm not very inclined to seeing my Enneagram, and this is something that I'm going to give you as a piece of advice. Do not look into your Enneagram too much, especially if you're asking for external help. Because you could be getting in the way of the person helping you with Enneagram. Enneagram is a very powerful tool, and it can really be of help. But it can be of help if the person controlling the situation is external. Because otherwise you're going to attempt to do whatever it is that it takes to grow, and then you're fooling yourself, you're making a fool out of yourself, and you're getting in the way of those who are helping you. So even if I can see the curiosity of knowing your Enneagram, if you are really going to use it as a tool for growth, I would suggest you to do as I do, that I deliberately decide to fool myself into being one type or another, not to look in depth into it, because I don't want to get in the way of my personal growth. So yeah. I mentioned Enneagram anyway for the reason that Ebenezer Scrooge is a very, very clear and very well defined and described Enneagram 5. So yeah, and I was thinking of saying that you could use those patterns to help yourself in case you're a 6, a 7, or a 9 to pull yourself out of disbelief. Anyway, yeah. I think I will close this here, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.